About 2 years ago, a friend of mine, medical doctor, Matthew Nathans, called me and said, my newest project is to publish a book about the Mormon Church, and I'd like you to be the director of photography. And I said, well, Matthew, that's going to be a tough one, you know, because they don't let you photograph a lot of things that happen in that church. They have rules against it. He said, oh no, we have permission. We can do anything we want. Nice Jewish doctor, you know. Dr. Nathans is an interesting person. He is the man who came up with the idea for this project. He was a medical doctor, was in Israel when the Six-Day War broke out, took some photographs that were very good, sold them to Time magazine, and said, you know, why did I go to medical school? I'm going to be a photographer. Which indeed, he became one of the world's best photojournalists and traveled around the globe for Time magazine, photographing various leaders and wars and events. But then he's sort of a Renaissance person. Now what he does is, even though he is still a licensed medical doctor in the state of California, he publishes photo books. And when he was shooting a story for National Geographic, he was doing a story on the Centers for Disease Control in Atlanta and became good friends with the director for the Centers of Disease Control at that time, Dr. James O. Mason. Dr. Mason is, of course, a member of the 70, a counselor in the Africa area presidency. And they used to sit deep into the night drinking their root beer, talking about the common experiences they'd had in their two religions, Judaism and being a Latter-day Saint. 2 years later, Matthew was going skiing in Utah, and he gets his taxi cab, and this Samoan driver is driving him in the midst of this driving hard snowstorm. And he said, you know, where are you from? He said, I'm from Samoa. He said, well, what are you doing in Utah in the middle of winter? You could be basking on the beaches of Samoa. And he said, well, I'm a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And I've come here to live, and I'm studying at the university, and I do this job part-time. And suddenly, Matthew had his own small revelation. This thought was given to him at that moment. It became very clear to him that these conversations he'd had with Dr. Mason about the church were to prepare him to publish a book about the church. He realized what the church was. The church wasn't a little group of people in Salt Lake City, Utah. It was a worldwide phenomenon. So he wrote a letter to Dr. Mason the next day. He said, you know, I'm publishing books now, and I think we should do a book about the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Didn't hear anything, and 2 weeks later he got a call from a church public affairs in Salt Lake City. He said, you know, this is an interesting idea you've brought to us. We'd like to talk to you. So that's the brief history. At that point, this book project started. I was brought in. I knew Matthew. I am a freelance photographer and picture editor. I'd worked with Matthew on some other projects, and he thought that I would be perfect for this. When he brought me in, I thought to myself, well, this will be interesting. And I came in with no preconceptions. I came in with a very basic knowledge of the church. But I didn't want a whole lot of knowledge at that point. What I wanted to do was learn about it, and then my job was to decide what were the important things to photograph to illustrate the church to people who didn't know it. And that's why I was glad that I didn't know it. I didn't want any preconceptions. It became a much more emotional involvement for me as the year to year and a half that I spent working on this project progressed. It became more than just a job for me, the objective journalist. I began to see that there were a lot of misconceptions about the church, and what I hoped to do was help produce a document that would explain to people outside of the church what it was to live the life as a Latter-day Saint. So, who is my slide changer? Let's turn off the lights, and I won't bore you guys anymore because I know I'm not a good speaker because I didn't grow up like all good Mormons do, speaking to groups from the age of 8. My job started at 4:30 in the morning and ended at 11 or 12 o'clock that night. At 4:30 in the morning, I would get up and I would spend my entire day talking to Latter-day Saints. It, of course, very quickly became apparent to me that the most elemental building block of the church was in the family. The strength of the church was not in a group like this, but in the family. I wanted to find a family that was as far removed from the support system that a local ward and stake could give you, and yet was unwavering in their belief in the scriptures, in their performance of ordinances. So I found this family in Alaska, because what I did was I found out then was, what's the most remote part of the church? Well, there are a lot. But one is up in Alaska, where they have a district called the Bush District, which stretches for 2,000 miles across Alaska, across the Bering Strait, into Russia. To Magadan, Russia, is its westernmost point. The Latter-day Saints there are so scattered and things are so spread out, and it is so difficult to get around, that the area presidency permits them to do visiting teaching and home teaching by mail. That's right, y'all are thinking about that one, aren't you? I may not be a Latter-day Saint, but I know. So I talked to the district president. I said, you know, give me the name of a family that's out there by themselves. He said, well, you know, Brother Bodley, he's a tremendous person. Why don't you call him? So I called up Lee Bodley here, and I was asking him about, you know, how he did sacrament meeting, how it was for his family. And he started talking to him. I said, well, how many children do you have? Because, you know, and I said, well, how do you baptize them? Because I know it's one thing to baptize an investigator or a member of your family in this nice baptismal font, you know, that's in a nice ward building somewhere. So how do you do that? Do you go to, do you and your family take a trip to the nearest ward building? I mean, where do you go? Is there a stake building? Is there, not a stake building, but is there some sort of font that everybody goes to? He said, oh no. He said, in fact, my son, Jacob, is turning 8 next month. And I'm going to baptize him out back in the beaver pond, which is where he did his other children. You know, my heart goes, I said, well, could we come along and visit you and photograph that? No, not only did he say it was okay for us to come up there, I said to him, I said, well, now, where can I have my photographer stay? What hotel is near you? That's right, he laughed just like that. He said, there's no hotel. He said, but it doesn't matter because we insist on having him here as our guest. This is another thing that we did throughout this project. These non-member journalists, these members of the media, came in as guests, stayed with Latter-day Saint families, stayed with missionaries. We were permitted to stay with missionaries out in the mission field. Photograph life as we saw it. Nobody said to us, well, you got to shoot this or you can't shoot that. They just said, well, sure, come on down. Here's the church in its basic form. You don't need the nice buildings. And I think you don't need the nice buildings. You don't need to have everybody here like, you don't have to feel like you're doing it because of peer pressure. That's not the way Latter-day Saints work. And this man's a good example of that. Here he is out in this beaver pond in September, and I have to tell you something. It is cold in Alaska in September. Can I have that next slide? So he starts to do this ordinance, and you know what? That water is too cold. Can I have the next slide? He did not get that boy completely submerged. He started to cry. Is that in focus? He started to cry. He started to get scared. There is something that points me in the direction of this man, this family, this event, this time. And then we get up there and our photographer's photographing this, and it's neat. I mean, think about it. Look at how beautiful that area was. His son starts to panic, one of the most important days in this young man's life. And his daddy loves him. It's another trait I've learned about Latter-day Saint families. Children come first. He pulls him up out of the water, gives him this big hug. He's not about to make this young man go back in that water. He's too frightened. But I began to see it, and I saw this happen in other places. There's an evil thing happening here. There's something happening that makes this kid panic and is trying to interfere with this ordinance, especially when we're there to photograph it to show it to the world. But this boy's daddy is no fool. I mean, he went into the tanning shed and dumped out the tub, cleaned it out, this is what water looks like up there. That's clean water. And they did that baptism in the work shed. It doesn't matter what the surroundings are. It's the ordinance. I want to show you something else too. You'll see in a couple of spots here. Look at this. Look at this young man. This is one of his other sons. Now they're up there in Alaska. He doesn't have the stake president standing around watching to make sure that, he has to worry about impressing the stake president or the other folks in the ward or something like that with the fact that the kids are all dressed right. But you know what? It's an ordinance, something to be treated with respect. His family dresses like this. Look, I like this. White shirt and tie, rubber boots. May I have the next slide, please? See that? These two men they came up for the day for this. They don't normally live there, and these are the, Lee Bodley and his family are the only Latter-day Saints in the area. Can I have the next slide? Now we're back in California now. I like this picture a lot. This is one of the quiet pictures in the book. A lot of them are quiet pictures, and I think they speak so much. Blessing for the school year. Here's the problem when you belong to the church. I would talk to people all the time, and I'm talking to people in church public affairs, because they're, of course, saying, well, now you got to make sure you do this, you got to make sure you do that. Nobody says a word to me about a father blessing his children for the school year. I mean, to me, this is a wonderful thing. It shows so much. So, school had already begun in a lot of places when I found out about it. Somebody mentioned this, and I said, whoa, wait a minute. So we found this district down there in Los Angeles that was starting school, and I found a family, and we got a photographer in there, a young woman named Jan Sonnenmeyer. Just photographed this few moments where these daughters came in, and this father blessed them for the school year. And I like it because, look, you know, a lot of people would think, you know, when you photograph this, you got to have all of the father, you know. But this talented photographer, she realized that what's important here was this. Just to see her father's hands upon her face, her head, so that you see her face. Look at her face here. Look at the look that I later began to realize. You know, when I first started working on this, people would say things to me like, yeah, you know, feeling the Spirit. Yeah, that's good for you guys. I'm a journalist. And I began to see, and then I began to be, and I began to experience this myself. I mean, look at the look in this young woman's face. What I like about this, her father's hands up there, to me, symbolize so much about the strength of his leadership, of her family, of his love for her, of the ordinance. Back here, her sister's waiting. She's out of focus, but you can just see just her form. She's just waiting in this respectful repose. Can I have the next slide? Here's another one. Woman who photographed this. This is in Virginia. I sent people to family home evenings all over the world. And I had a list of things that I would send to these photographers and say, now look for this. And I would brief them on the telephone before they went out. And one of the things I said to look for was, look, you know, make sure you get some pictures of the kids writing in their journals. And they would say to me, what? How do you know they're going to write in their journals? Did they tell you this? No, I said, but I know my Mormons. I didn't know this was going to happen. I'm going to read this. Some of you in the front no doubt can read what this young man's written in his journal. For those of you who can't, and those of you in the back, this is going to blow you away. That on the day that we were there, this happened. Nobody told me this was going to happen. I got the priesthood today. It was the greatest feeling of my life. As my dad ordained me, I felt a great feeling of peace, warmth, and love. And things the Lord, through my dad, said were, he was well pleased, continued health, and strength. It's been a great day. Family home evenings. This is Nevada. Can I have the next one? Samoa. The next one. This is in Chile. In Peru. Just outside of Lima. This is in a branch president's home. No electricity. Have the next one. Dominican Republic. Have the next one. Utah State Prison. A unique program where this family adopts this man who's a prisoner there. And you know, they could have their family home evening at home. Maybe go out to Snell Groves and have an ice cream. See, I know which one of y'all are from Salt Lake now. But they choose to take their families and their family home evenings and go out there, even on a night like when it's cold and snowy. Have the next one. This is Ireland. This man's name is Ray Close. He is a professional boxer. Can I have the next one? And they call him the Stormen Morneman. When we were doing this, we did a little essay on Brother Close here. And we photographed him. He was going to be fighting. He had some fight coming up. The photographer called me, Barry Lewis. Barry works for National Geographic, Life magazine. He's a British photographer, lives outside of London. And Barry called me, he was very upset. He said, I just spoke to Ray Close, and they've lifted his boxing license because they did an X-ray or whatever it is they do of his brain. They found a fissure, and they said that they were afraid that if he got hit even one more time in the wrong way, it would kill him. So I developed these phone friendships with these folks around the world, and I called them up. I said, I heard this. I said, I'm really sorry, because boxing was very important to him. He said, I could hear that he was dejected. He said, I've got my family, I've got my church, and I'm praying. He said, I know that there's something wrong, that can't be happening in my brain. So I got a call a month later from Barry Lewis. He'd made them go back and examine him again, and suddenly it disappeared. This thing that they lifted his boxing license for, they said, we must have read it wrong. Have the next slide. There are certain things you can't do, you can't go without if you're going to do a book on the church. And family reunions are one of them. It looks like the photographer said, okay, stick them up. Have the next slide. Okay, two things. Gold and green ball. Right? Look, I know I'm not a member yet. Bring them back. They were a great idea. Perth, Australia. Gold and green ball. Perth, Australia. I mean, I had to go to the ends of the earth to find the last of the gold and green balls. I'll tell you something else. I am still trying to get this photographer to get this girl's name because I want her to come take care of my shoes. So again, this is what I like about, if you're a member of the church, you know how to be innovative. I mean, look, she took herself a pair of Nikes and went crazy. Have the next one. Isn't this sweet? The father and daughter dance at the Gold and Green Ball. Have the next one, please. A couple other things that I wanted to make sure that I got when we were working on this, and they were difficult. Well, one of them wasn't so difficult, which is youth. They're everywhere. The pioneer heritage of the church is so important. I didn't want to miss that. But at the same time, how was I going to photograph something that happened 100 years ago? So I'm talking to somebody one day. He says, group, a youth group, youth trek. And I said, what are you talking about? Well, they're going to do a handcart trek. I said, what do you mean handcarts? Well, Martin and Willie Trail. Oh, yeah, Martin and Willie Trail. I'll call you back. Where's my Encyclopedia of Mormonism? And I would read about these things, the Martin and Willie Trail. So I found out the stake that this youth group was coming from and got in touch with him. Sent Paul Chesley with him. Paul Chesley is a National Geographic photographer. He's one of the best in the world, one of the nicest guys. He said, Paul, go and hang out with these kids for 3 or 4 days. They're going to be pulling hand carts across the desert. You know, there are certain questions every photographer asks. He wanted to know if he was going to have an assistant to pull his cart. Actually, I gave Paul a 4-wheel drive. I said, look, we'll get you a 4-wheel drive. And it turned out to be a good thing because he turned out to be the ambulance car. Can I have the next one? Look at this. I love this. You know, you look at this and you would think, my Lord, how did they do this? They like took a camera back in time and got people going across the desert, except for this darn orange thing up here. And then we got Mr. Cool here. I like this. I mean, look at that. I mean, you can see what's going into that. Mindful of the heritage of the pioneers. Can I have the next slide? Mr. Photographer, where's that car? They suffered their share of blisters. I love those two in the background. You see this? Look at this girl's gloves here. All right, can I have the next one? Look at that. This is in this little pass that they went through, and there were all these engravings of the pioneers that had gone through there. Have the next one. We dive into our work. This is a girls' youth camp in Nauvoo, Illinois. Nauvoo. May I have the next slide? Anybody want to guess? You know, it's his back, and you know who it is right away, don't you? This was before President Hinckley became the prophet. He was counselor to the first presidency. Somebody said to me after the book was out, they said, you know, I was talking somewhere, and they said, you know, I like that picture because it reminds me of, it's the pose of the Christus. And I had never thought about that. I'd never seen it in that way, but he holds his hands in that same manner. And this is just a shot where, you know, he's talking to this group of young women. Can I have the next one? That was Mel Griffith. He established the rodeo program at Ricks College. And pretty cool. Pretty neat guy. Can I have the next one? So we went and we photographed the rodeo, the Ricks College rodeo team. Can I have the next one? Buckles are us. These are all buckles for winning various, you know, prizes and championships and stuff like that. So he's got a good group there, is what this is saying. I like this. I like these photographers. They look for these details. Can I have the next one? You know, you don't like this picture, you don't like apple pie. Jerusalem Center. It is really neat there. Have the next one. So, of course, we went to the Jerusalem Center, BYU Jerusalem Center, and were there for several days, traveled around with the students. This, of course, is the Wailing Wall. For those of you who maybe have never been there or don't know about it, you know, the Wailing Wall is a very sacred place. When you go there, there's a point beyond which, if you're a woman, you can't go into this area. Only men can go. And there's another area for women over there. and you must have your head covered at all times as a sign of respect. So they give these little cardboard head coverings out here. Now, I've been there, and I've seen people that go in, and they stand around and they gawk, or they take pictures. This is what I like about this. I think this is something very indicative. Look at these young men. I mean, it's a quiet picture, but it says a lot. They're not standing around and gawking. They're engaged in some conversation with these elders. They're engaged in learning. It's students from the Jerusalem Center. Can I have the next one? All right. Salt Lake City. Angel Moroni, Delta Flight 531, returning with missionaries. I love this picture. It says so much. Can we have the next one? Ed Cashy took this picture. That last one was taken by Joel Sartori. Joel is a National Geographic photographer, and so is Ed. So Ed and I and a few others were there for General Conference. I have not missed a General Conference in 2 years now in Salt Lake City. But I only made the mistake one time of sitting through all those sessions on those wooden benches in the tabernacle. I told Ed, I said, listen, I'm going to be working late tomorrow. I'm starting early with stuff. You go out at 4:30, because I want you to shoot. People will be lining up outside of Temple Square, because they are going to be anxious to get in there. Get their tickets for General Conference. He said, it is cold. Peter, what do you think? People aren't going to be out there? What makes you think they're going to be out there? I know my Mormons. And as you can see, they were indeed out there before daybreak. And he made a really fine photo. I mean, look at this with these kids here, you know, under blankets, you know. It's all right here, the temple. And just this kid's face here, just to give it some balance over there. Here we are at the other end of the day, for lining up to go into the priesthood session. You all know that famous poster that was once a cover of the New Yorker. It said the New Yorker view of the world. There was New York, then there was the rest of the world. It's the Mormon view of the world. This is in between sessions of General Conference. Have the next one. Before. This next one. After. Solemn Assembly. This is the last Solemn Assembly. They'd never permitted a photograph to be made from right behind the brethren in this manner. Normally when you have a camera and you're at General Conference, you're restricted to this area. There's a spot back there they'll let you get at, and then sometimes an area over here. But that's it. And don't be moving while people are speaking. So somehow I convinced them to let me go in there and take this picture, you know. And I looked up at one point, and there's all these good church photographers are looking down going, who is the guy with the beard? Ed Cashy. I said, now when you get done, have some breakfast, and I want you to go out and meet this family down in Sandy, Utah. They're going to be watching General Conference on their TV, and when Solemn Assembly comes on, he says, what's Solemn Assembly? I said, well, they sustain the new prophet. I said, I want you to photograph them because they're going to stand and sustain. He said, what do you mean? He said, well, they stand up and they hold their hand. He said, what makes you think they're going to, did you ask them? And I said, no. He said, well, why do you think they're going to do that? I know my Mormons. I was showing this recently. I was in New York, and somebody said, Hey, that's my brother. No, he was actually a missionary there. He was serving his mission. When I was working on this, I would get excited, and I began to get really excited about it, and I would tell people I knew about it, and I would hear all the stupidities about the church that some of you, I'm sure, have heard. One of the things I heard was, well, it's just a church for white guys in Utah. They don't let women do anything in that church. And this is what I like about this. This is a picture that was made with a remote camera. I took this camera, bracketed it up, aimed it down into a spot of the audience the day before solemn assembly, and set it on automatic, plugged in a little radio remote, and then fired it during solemn assembly. And what I got was a cross-section of the church. Got a cross-section of ages, got a cross-section of ethnicities, got men and women. I mean, look at the looks in these people's faces. Very serious stuff. All there for a common purpose. All there together. So no, it's a church of many different types. The brethren, some people, I think, many people think these are very serious men. But they're great human beings, too. There was this one security guard, and there was just something about me that really, he just couldn't fathom why the brethren were letting me come around. I snapped this picture, and this guy came over and said, "You're not supposed to be here." Can I have the next one? This is on the day, the 150th anniversary of the martyrdom. This is the jail in Carthage, Illinois. This is the room where the great-grandfather to Elder Ballard was murdered. Prophet Joseph Smith was murdered. And I went up there with these two men on that day before they went out to face this big crowd of people to talk about the martyrdom. You can see they're both caught up in their own thoughts about that room and the events and the people that were in there exactly 150 years prior to those moments that they were standing there. This is the Sacred Grove. I had a photographer there photographing the Hill Cumorah pageant, and I said, what I want you to do is go down to the Sacred Grove every day in the morning. He said, well, what time does it open up? I said, well, they open at 9, but go down there earlier. There's no big fence or anything. It took him 4 mornings. On the 4th morning, he found this pair, this companionship down there, doing their scripture study there just prior to 7 a.m. But this somebody said to me, "Oh, you set that picture up." Elder Faust asked me. He said, "Did you all put this one together?" I said, "No. We just kept going down there, and finally on the 4th day, they were there." But it looks like a young man 170 odd years ago, kneeling down in the Sacred Grove, praying. I had a map of the U.S. and then I had a map of the world. And on there, my assistant and I plotted out and put little marks where all of our assignments were being made. We drew in the different areas of the world because we wanted to make sure we shot something in each area of the church, even if it was only one thing. And we put little yellow dots where every temple was in the world. So I was staring at this map one day, waiting as the phone rang and rang and rang in Timbuktu. And it suddenly occurred to me, you know, some people have to go a long way to get to the temple. So I started thinking, who's got to make the most arduous journey to the temple? One of the places there it's difficult is Brazil, where the church is exploding. People in Brazil are taking to the gospel like you wouldn't believe it. I mean, you know, you have a pair of elders come around with scriptures in their hands, and it's incredible. Up on the Amazon, there is a city called Manaus. It was built by the rubber barons in the turn of the century. There's a mission there, and from there the missionaries work out up the river. People in Manaus are not rich. Once a year, they charter a riverboat and go down the Amazon River. It's a 3 to 4 day trip on the river. They get down the river to the big highway there, and they get on a bus for another 3 days, and then they get to the temple. They're there for that day and overnight, and they turn around and come back. For some of these people, that's the only trip they're going to make to the temple in their lives. They sell their houses, they sell their chickens and their goats, which is not a joke in that area of the world. So I got a photographer, a man named Klaus. Klaus is one of the best in the world. I said, Klaus, I want you to go down the river with these folks and just photograph their journey as they go down the river. Nothing but Latter-day Saints on this boat, and Klaus. This is a testimony meeting that he photographed one morning. Everything took place in this one little area. I mean, everybody had just this one little area of deck to share with each other. They slept there, they met there, they talked there. It's a big, wide, dirty river. Have the next one. But you know, when you make a journey like this, you have time to read your scriptures. Husband and wife. Probably making their first trip. Klaus was on this boat with these folks for 3 days, 4 days. He slept in the hammocks like they did, prayed with them, photographed them, made friends, talked with them. When he left, they pulled off to let him off at this one little town. He was going to catch a boat back up the river and then get an airplane and go back to where he was going. He said, you know, I got off and I carried my bags up and I turned around to wave goodbye. And he thought there was going to be a couple of people there and he was going to catch their eye and wave a final goodbye because he'd said goodbye. You know. Instead, everybody had silently gathered along the edge of the riverboat, along the banister, on the deck. The entire group was there. And when he turned around, they were waiting silently. And when he turned around, as he said to me later, it was a week later, I was debriefing him and I could hear his voice crack. With emotion, as he described, he said, "They made for me a song." They sang a hymn to him when he left. One of the most touching moments of his entire life, much less of his career. This was a project that left an indelible mark on everybody who had anything to do with it. So there's not much. I mean, this is what this is all about, isn't it? Not much you can say beyond what's there. I really like that. Joel Sartori shot that. Can I have the next one? You know, it's difficult shooting the church. When you're a photographer, you look for certain things that illustrate, for icons. You know, if you go into a church of another faith, if you were documenting this church, you know, they would have, maybe people would be wearing vestments, maybe there would be carvings of saints on the walls or something like that. You know, candles burning. I don't know. But you know, with this church, what's important are the words and the love between each other. So it's tough. But the one thing that, the one icon, if you can call it that, that's not the best word for it, but for photo shorthand, is the Angel Moroni. But I didn't want to just, I wanted to do something, I wanted a picture showing people working, I wanted to show workmen, I wanted to show members of the church around the Angel Moroni. Because I felt it was an important picture to get. As it subsequently turned out, this picture wound up being the cover. I didn't know that it would be. He said, well, Acey, say your prayers. That's right. That's why I thought, look, I'm a photographer, I'm a journalist. You can pray. I'm dealing with the facts here. He said, say your prayers. I went to bed that night. I thought about him. I thought, all right, please. I don't think that worked, but I know that Bill was praying, and I think that worked, because a week later I got a fax. Came across, my fax rings and comes on, and I start seeing an announcement from the Washington, D.C. temple. They were doing some work on the exterior. They went up, they looked at it, they decided they had to do more work. It was more extensive than they just realized it was going to be. And while they were up there, they decided they were going to put new gold leaf on the Angel Moroni. But that's what this is. This is the Angel Moroni on top of the 330 feet up in the air, 18 feet tall. They had scaffolding every 6 feet. I mean, I know so many little details about this church you wouldn't believe it. And it was pretty neat, and I like that. This man, Daniel Horn and his brother Dave Horn, do this kind of work. They're come from old Latter-day Saint families. They are craftsmen. They do this kind of work for the church all over the world. For I don't know how many of y'all here have been to Salt Lake and been into the Joseph Smith Memorial Building. But you know that lobby in there, that incredible ceiling? This man and his brother did that. They restored that a few years ago. This is Manila in the Philippines, Philippine temple. Children getting ready to go in and do some ordinance work. San Diego. Is that incredible? This is a temple open house. Temple open house. I don't know if this is a Latter-day Saint family, but the way they're standing here, they should be. Temple Square, Christmas. Joel Sartori shot this. I mentioned before, he works for National Geographic, worked with us on this project on several things. A church liked this so much, they got a copy of it from Joel this year, and some of the departments use it as a church Christmas card. It's just beautiful. Can I have the next slide? The sisters in Temple Square. Can I have the next one? This, of course, is a sister at the back of the tabernacle, wondering if she has to listen to those nails drop anymore that day. I'm just kidding. Have the next one. Aww. This is a picture that deserves an eye. We were permitted to shoot baby blessings. The brethren have asked me to issue a disclaimer here. Don't try this at home. We always had to give this disclaimer when we were going to be photographing during a sacrament meeting, during a baby blessing. You know, otherwise, everybody's grandmother was going to be up there trying to shoot these pictures themselves. So these bishops would be going, stay in your seats. This was in Detroit. This is in Brooklyn. This is in Mexico. This, of course, is a confirmation. This is in Africa. I love this. I edited this woman's photographs on this story. This little boy's sitting there. She's shooting away. And there was one frame. He brings his hands up to his face like this, and you can just tell that he is really feeling something at that moment. She has one frame of it. No doubt because it happened very briefly, but she got it. Something else I like about this is, you know, they say this is a white man's church, but it's not. This is a multi-ethnic church. She ain't heavy. She's my mama. Let the first person in here who has not fallen asleep. All right, let's go to the next slide. That's in Mexico. These next two slides, this picture is in the 11th Ward, I think it is, in Salt Lake City. I like it. This one and the next slide, I think, say a lot about the church. I think these two men represent a lot about the wisdom and the experience of the church. Can I have the next slide? And in Detroit, these two young ladies are the youth, the vitality, and the future of the church. Have the next slide. You know, it's like I was saying at the very beginning. Here's his primary class. You don't have to have anything more than the shade of a tree, some rough-hewn benches, some scriptures, and some primary songs. Got to have a tree to hang your bags on to keep the ants out. But Heavenly Father provides the basics. Can I have the next one? This is a little picture essay, these next few slides. It's one of my favorite things in the book. This man is Bishop Gertz, Heber Gertz. In this picture, he's holding this button here that says, I care. And I didn't see this when I edited this stuff. And I didn't do all the editing on this book. We had several editors. We had an editor from National Geographic. We had an editor from the White House photo staff. We had an editor who now works with Corbis Media, who has won more picture editing and design awards than anybody else in America. These were the kind of people that we had working on this project. But this button says, I care, on Heber Gertz's collar is underneath his collar. It's on the underneath part. It's right over his heart. But it's a silent affirmation to himself. Latter-day Saints, I haven't found too many of them that brag yet. Bishop Gertz, this picture was made in the Utah State Prison. Bishop Gertz is the man who started that family home evening program that you saw earlier in the Utah State Prison. In 1955, he was serving a calling as a bishop. One of the folks in his ward said, Bishop, would you mind going and seeing my brother-in-law? He's out there in jail for something or the other. So he went out there, and he didn't stop going for 40 years. They called him Bishop Gertz all his life. He had been relieved of his calling long before. Have the next picture. Look at this. Look at this little man. Bishop Gertz could go anywhere he wanted in this prison. Now, don't forget, this is the prison where, unfortunately, they just had to perform an execution. It was in the news this last week. There are not nice people in this prison, even though it's in Utah. You kind of like to think that they're in there because they've sort of been like messing with the Jell-O recipes or something like that. Look at this though. Look at these big men. Look at these guys. You know, this guy has not got his missionary haircut going here. And this man's waiting, he's next. Bishop Gertz had access anywhere in this prison, including maximum security and death row. Nobody else had that, and he had it without an escort. And I was speaking to him, I had several phone conversations with him. I said, Bishop Gertz, I said, well, aren't you afraid that, what if one of these men hurts you? He said, oh, they wouldn't do that. I thought, oh man, he has got faith in the Heavenly Father. And then he added, he said, if one of them hurt me, the others would kill him. That's a true story. Can I have the next one? Look at this. Isn't that sweet? This man, I have no doubt in my mind, has known a life with some violence in it. Bishop Gertz's presence. You know, you go into prison, you don't be doing this with another man. Bishop Gertz was the exception. There's Bishop Gertz. See this guard here? That's because the photographer was there. He was the guard for the photographer. Have the next one. You know, this is again one of these things. In the week, I asked Joel to go out and shoot for 1 or 2 days. Joel, you know, we paid him for a couple days on this. He worked another 3 days. These stories, when you have the right kind of journalist together, the story is more important. He went home with Bishop Gertz one night, and this man and his wife came over to visit. This man had been a prisoner. He got in there, his life was all wrong. He started talking with Bishop Gertz. He was a part of that family home evening program, and it made a difference in his life. He came out. He was a member of a ward again. They were talking about it, and it got to be a moment of tender feelings, tender emotions. Everybody in that room started to cry. Joel got this photograph. A few months after we shot this, and a month before the book project came out, Bishop Gertz passed away. Relief Society. People, you know, I told you, people said to me, you know, women don't do anything in this church. I thought, yeah, I got 2 words for you, Relief Society. Anybody in here hasn't done this, who's a woman over 20-odd years old? I love this. You know, I dropped a lot of hints. Every time I got around Mormon women, I dropped a lot of hints like, boy, I sure could use a quilt. You know, but y'all are always one step ahead of me. Let me have the next picture, please. Relief Society Literacy Project in South Africa. Have another one? Next one. I love this. This is Dominican Republic. This is a young man, he's an elder, he's a missionary, but it's a Stake Relief Society organized project. It's a service project to go to the the retirement home, the Catholic retirement home there, where they are very welcome. As the Mother Superior told me, she said, you know, we have many faiths who come in here to volunteer and help us, but they like to sit and read and talk. But the Mormons, they mop, they clean the windows, they help change the bedding. If you want some work done, get the Mormons in here. And that is not an exaggeration of what she said. May I have the next picture, please? I love the way that sister back there is watching, that Catholic sister. Speaking of sisters, here we have a member of the Relief Society taking part in this welfare farm harvest in Wenatchee, Washington. This lady just tickles me pink. I mean, look, when I edited the film, there was all these pictures of these young macho Mormon boys on top of the trees throwing pears down, and, you know. And then we had this lady, and she was just going along, and look, she's got this bag filled up, and I don't know if y'all have ever picked fruit, but that ain't light. And she's got a smile on the whole time. But you know what I really like about her? It's Saturday afternoon. It's the Steak Welfare Harvest Project. The next day's Sunday, though, so that hair's in curlers. She's got to look good the next day. Barry Lewis, I mentioned him before. He shot the Storming Mormon. Barry Lewis shot this. This is Carol Gray, 5 foot 4 inches tall, 7 children, Relief Society president in England. When the awful stuff started to happen, when Yugoslavia broke up, and Croatia, and you all know about, you know, that awful civil war was going on, she realized there were people going without there. So she organized a Relief Society project, bring in diapers, bring in canned goods, blankets, you know. She got it in, and she realized there was no way, there was no organized way to get it over there. So she got people to donate some trucks and some vans, and she got some people to donate their time, and she headed up this convoy and drove it over there. Cross England, on the ferry, into Belgium, cross Germany, into Croatia. And they adopted this village, and they would bring these supplies in. This is like about a week-and-a-half long trip, round trip. So I had Barry go and photograph this trip. And he went with them, and they sleep on bags of rice and stuff in the trucks. They had a testimony meeting on the edge of the Black Sea. They lost a trailer. In other trips, they had been used for target practice by military types. I don't know. They got done. This was the end of the day. This woman came up to her. You know, the Lord has sent you to us. You know, Barry snaps this photo. Look at that sky, and look at her eyes. Yeah, women don't do anything in this church. Here's Moscow. Have the next one. Elders, can y'all flip flapjacks like that? I want to know where this young man came from. Man that shot this, Nikolai Ignatiev. Nikolai is a Russian photographer. He's a fine man. Has a wife, 2 young children. The week before he did this assignment was in Chechnya. The stuff in Chechnya had started. Don't forget, this is a year and a half or so ago. I called up there one night, and I had had trouble getting through, so occasionally I would have to call late on the night of whatever their time zone was, their night. And I knew I was calling late, and I should have thought more. I was pretty stupid. And I woke up his wife, and I could hear her voice quavering. She told me, she said, Nikolai was on a train. He was trying to get out of Chechnya with 2 other photographers when a soldier came on the train and fired his machine gun in the compartment, sprayed it like this. He killed the friend on Nikolai's right and wounded the friend on his left. These are the type of photographers that we have working on this. These are people who are totally committed to gathering the story, no matter what it may be, about this revolution in Chechnya. Barry Lewis, before he went with Carol Gray, had been in Rwanda for a month during the time when all those awful stuff was happening in those refugee camps. Have the next one. This is in Belize in Central America. You know, it doesn't matter. It's like I keep saying to y'all, it doesn't have to be a nice living room or, you know. Come on over here. I want to talk about the gospel. This is in Africa. You know, they're not having as much fun with their food as the boys in Moscow were with theirs. But the lessons are the same. And the outcome is the same. This is in New York, in Harlem. Some fool got in there and misspelled the church. What else could it be? You know, I like this. I mean, think about it. You know, you see these, look at these pictures and the ones you've seen earlier. You know, these elders and sisters, their work, their mission work takes them into all kinds of environments. And it doesn't matter. It can be a jungle in Belize or a jungle in the city of New York, Dominican Republic. This elders and sisters who may be in there, this is morning scripture study. Those mosquito nets were not for show. And, you know, I can just imagine what goes on when the photographer's not there. No, sister, it's your turn. You get out. But they look at them. They're talking about their scriptures there through that mosquito netting. The photographer slept on the floor. They gave her a little mat and some, and I think she brought her own mosquito netting. But this was one where we got to stay with the missionaries. This is Hong Kong. Looking across the harbor there. And I know that this young man is saying to his companion, well, elder, President says we got to have them all taught by this afternoon. They're back. Let anyone who has served a mission in here tell me you haven't seen that look. I used to, when I was working on this, I would, as a courtesy, it wasn't required, as a courtesy to the church, I would take a tray that would show some of what we were doing and meet with some members of the 12. And I was showing this to Elder Faust. He just got the biggest kick out of this. P-Day in the Filipino MTC. It's a game the missionaries play called Hot Baby. Ooh! You know, I was with the missionaries in the United States, in Central America, in Thailand. There was something that I noticed everywhere that I went. Children, missionaries are children magnets. Children is, a missionary. They love the missionaries. And that's good. And the missionaries love the children. Isn't that sweet? This is in Africa. I had a tough time. I tell you, there was one here, I am sure that there was someone who was not on my side or Heavenly Father's side, did not want me to get in there and show these pictures. Because every obstacle that could have been thrown up was thrown up. This mission president in Nairobi in Kenya wanted, he was trying his best to work with us. Of course, his responsibilities came first, but there was this area out in western Kenya that we wanted to get to. And first, we had a photographer who was going to go down there. He got malaria, and he didn't get down there. Then there was another time we were going to go, and there was a problem. The mission couple out there had to leave. And the country is such that the president there wants to have a mission couple in the neighborhood, so to speak. They're sort of the anchor for those elders that are out there. So when that mission couple had to leave, he pulled in all his elders. And well, there was nothing for me to photograph out there. So we got out there right when the elders were coming back and this new mission couple. I should tell you, by the way, this was one of the. I was talking to this man late at night one night, where it was his morning, and we got done. He sort of slipped. He said, "Well, Brother Harper, how'd the 49ers do today?" So every time I had to talk to him after that, I would fax him a note. President, I'm going to call you, and I would put the clipping about Steve Young or the 49ers at the end of that note. So we were out there when the mission couple and the elders were first coming back for the first time in 6 months. And you can see the happiness of the people there at seeing, the missionaries are back. Salt Lake City. I'm telling you, y'all kept us bouncing all over the globe. Joel Sartori was shooting in Salt Lake City, and I said to Joel, he said, well, I got a couple of down days here. What can I do? I said, Joel, go out to the airport. I said, well, what am I going to do there? I said, look, go out there, wait for some missionaries to return from their missions. Get them when their families greet them. He said, well, can you find out if any are going to come back? You know what I told him, don't you? I said, Joel, I know my Mormons. All you got to do is just go down there and just go to the first gate where you see people. And he did. And here's Mom. Can I have that next slide? Now, this is Matt. I don't know who she is. She better be the second person he hugged, though. Now, this is another interesting one. I send Joel out there blind. Joel, they're good people. They'll welcome you into their arms. Just find a group, tell them what you're doing, photograph it when their sons come home, and then go on to the next one. So he finds this group, he starts photographing them, and they say, hey, why don't you come home with us? We're going to have a little party. Joel thought, Jell-O. Can I have the next one, please? They get home, they walk in the front door. Mom checks the mailbox. Guess what? This young man just came back from Brazil. His brother was being sent to Brazil on the same day that his brother just came back. To the same mission. Now, again, I want to ask you, you might have thought I set up some of this other stuff. What is it that makes us be present on the day that one young man came home from a mission and the other goes off? The other gets his calling. This is back in the Dominican Republic. You know, look at that look. I know now what it means. I can see it. You can edit these pictures and start to feel the Spirit just from the emotion you see in these pictures. So you can see what she's feeling. And you can see that this is the sister that helped to teach her by the joy in her face. This, of course, is Brigham Wise. Brigham comes from this ward. I photographed Brigham. His father mentioned at the beginning of the evening that I followed him when he got his calling. When he went to Mr. Max, I was with them in the MTC. And I thought to myself, do I go with Mom and Dad? Or do I go with Brigham? I felt like I was going off on a mission. And believe me, this book was my mission. I went with him to Thailand. I was with him in Thailand for 8 or 9 days. I photographed him as he met his mission president, as he got his first companion, as he went out to this little town in northwestern Thailand called Royet. And I had photographed all this stuff, and I was like a day away from leaving, and it was like I didn't know what I was going to do. Because when you shoot a picture story, it's like writing a story. You have a beginning, a middle, and an end. And I knew I had a beginning, I knew I had a middle, and I didn't have an end. I didn't have a closing picture. Well, I was lying there, and I thought about my friend Bill Evans back in Salt Lake City, and I said a prayer. So the next day we went out, and this young lady had been reluctant to be baptized. She was afraid of the water, for one thing. We went in there the next day, and she said, I'm ready to be baptized. So Brigham's companion, or actually it was her mother, said, well, who do you want to baptize you? She said, I want Elder Wise. Except to me it sounded like, but they told me that's what she said. She was a sweet little girl. I'll never forget this little girl as long as I live. The baptismal font, they do have a nice meeting house there, and they do have a nice baptismal font, but they were expanding the meeting house. It was back under construction, and the baptismal font was out of order. They said, well, we know where there is a pond here, and we can go to it. And we went out there, and I started thinking, oh, my Lord, there's not going to be any daylight left. We got out there, and we went out into the water. I mean, there was hardly any time, and I was like, I just put my cameras on automatic pilot. I started using these automatic cameras because my eyes don't focus as well anymore, so... I use these autofocus, and I knew that when I got out there, I knew that when this started to happen, I knew I was going to start feeling that emotion, and I wasn't going to be able to see. I said a prayer to myself as we walked out in the water, because I'm thinking, I'm messing up my pants here. I didn't know I was going to this water. I said a prayer, Lord, help me set everything right on this camera. And then I just photographed, and you see what we got here for light. And you see this moment when this little girl, after she has been baptized. This was the ending to my story. This has never been done before. The Quorum of the 12 and the First Presidency, if you think about it and you remember, you never have seen them in the same photograph. When you see them in the church news or the ensign, you have the 12 You have the first presidency, but not together. And usually they're photographed in this meeting room that's on the first floor of the church administration building. So you can't do a book, you can't do a story about the church and not do a photograph that has all of these men in it. And I worked on this thing for 9 months, and I realized that what I wanted to do was I wanted to photograph them underneath the Christus in the North Visitor Center. That's what the church was all about. That's what these men were all about. Now, this photograph you see here is actually the second time this picture was done. I think I didn't tell you one thing, and that was that there were 2 years of discussion between Dr. Nathans and the brethren about when to begin to do this book. And finally the brethren one day just said, you know, the time is right. Start on it now. And in that year that we were going to work on the book, from that point, the church, for the first time in its history, had 3 prophets. And the only time in its history. Again, I wonder why some of the things happened the way they did. Or I don't wonder. So we had done this photograph once. And I had to do it again. And I can tell you something. This was the very last photograph made for the book. It was made last April, on the Thursday after General Conference. You see, we've got all the current members of the 12 there, Elder Eyring. But I can tell you, getting these 15 men into the same room is not easy. They rarely are in the same place at the same time. We had like 1,600 square feet of silk up in the window to diffuse the sunlight. That's how we lit this. And then we put all these strobes behind them underneath that banister there to light up that sky, or it would have gone very dark as it is up in that corner. And you can see with the dark suits that the brethren favor, I would have lost them. It would have been nothing but floating faces, you know. And you don't do the brethren that way. So we had to figure out how to light that wall and get that separation. So D-Day, DR comes down there. We were there the day before working stuff out. Now, the next time you go to Salt Lake City, you go up in this room, you look up, you'll see that there's like a recessed or drop-down ceiling. It's round. I had these 2 workers up there holding the ropes that was holding this 1,600 square feet of silk. So that as the sun moved, they were like moving around up there to make sure the brethren were like, you know, cordoned off from the sunlight, the harsh light. We have security guys there. We've got my assistant and me and a couple of other people there, and my friend Bill Evans from Public Affairs, because even though everybody in the church liked me, there's certain times they don't want me running too wild and too loose. So I got everybody in there. I said, okay, I'm nervous. Got my camera down on the floor. Everything's ready. We've tested the lights. We've done the Polaroids. I said, okay. I looked through my camera, you know, and I look at them. I said, all right, guys, everybody move a little bit this way. And I hear Bill. Just a minute, Bill. No, that's too much. Guys, back this way a little bit. But I said, excuse me. What is it, Bill? Brethren. You call them brethren. He was trying to be cool. He did this without moving his lips. I said, of course. Brethren. Just this way a little bit. Oh, perfect. So I have them right. I run over, I get down on my knees behind my camera, and I'm kneeling down there, got the camera in this low tripod because it gives us perspective that we want. I'm down there on my knees, and I'm looking through my eyepiece of viewfinder, and I hear this voice, and it says, "Well, Acey, it's good to finally see you on your knees." "Yes," he adds, "we want to hear you pray now." Oh, I was praying. So we were having fun. You can see from the smiles up there that they were having some fun with me, and we were having fun with each other. It was an enjoyable visit for all of us. I shot these pictures. I hurried up. I got done. I stood up. I said, brethren, thank you very, very much. And they started to break away. They were saying, "Well, thank you." And then President Packer steps away and says, "Brethren, one more thing. Don't anybody else die before this book comes out." The work of the missionaries never ceases to astound me, no matter where it is. The only missionaries that I think have it really good are the sisters that work on Temple Square. I think that they're cheating because they get to work on Temple Square. I'm being chased. See you later. Thank you very much.